Welcome, everyone, to our exciting 100th episode of the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. With me today is Charlie Zygmunt.
Hey, everybody.
And Tammy Hess.
Hello.
Well, as I mentioned here, this is our 100th episode. Over the last 2 years, believe it or not, we've made 100 of these things. And what we're doing is we've pivoted, like many small businesses, we've pivoted to doing different things over the last couple of years and over these 100 episodes. But what we do today is we talk about the week's news, business, taxes, accounting, finance, all of it from the perspective of accountants. The three of us here are all accountants, but we've got a person on our team who's not an accountant. He has made this possible for these 100 episodes, and just want to give him a shout out here. Ethan, our producer, our podcast and video editor extraordinaire, coordinator, makes this happen for us. So thank you, Ethan, as we are here in the 100th episode. And we're also rolling in, as you can see here, to Halloween. And so what are we going to do on this spooky Friday afternoon? Well, we're going to be talking about, from accounting today, 5 data strategies for a tax department. That's certainly a little bit frightening. We're going to be talking about Boston Beer throwing away excess product. That not only scares us, but makes us cry. The Journal of Accountancy has an article, a podcast transcript on hiring for culture, and leads us to the question, do you assess self-awareness? We're going to talk about IRS video conferencing. What could be scarier than that? We're going to talk about the change in Facebook to Metaverse. And finally, for the 100th episode, we're going to be addressing 100 ships in the harbor. All right, well, let's kick this off. I'll kick it over first to Charlie.
So I've got an article we can start with from Accounting Today, of all sources, 5 data strategies to optimize a tax department. And so the premise of the article is these are the things that a tax department should be doing to really optimize how it handles data, and just lists out 5 things that I thought would be good things to kind of talk about and to see if these are universal things for accounting firms or if this is really more of a tax specific kind of a thing to be thinking about. So for them, the 5 strategies to optimize data would be what they call the holy grail of standardized data. So they make a big point about whatever you're taking in from clients needs to be set up in a way to be comparable to other clients or to other pieces of information that same client may provide. It talks about adapting the cloud for greater effectiveness. Pretty self-explanatory. Embracing intelligent automation. And it said embedding intelligent automation capabilities such as cognitive capability, machine learning, and enhanced vision, speech, and language. So I kind of want to share that just to kind of give an idea of what that even means, because you hear things like embracing intelligent automation, and it just could mean almost anything, but to them, that's what it is. So it's using things like OCR, optical character recognition, and that kind of stuff. And then talks about turning predictive modeling into insights. So coming out with conclusions or understanding the why of different business events rather than just understanding what happened. And then finally, its last point was exploring managed services. So trying to find like automation solutions and technology-enabled resources that take away from the things that the tax firm is expected to do. And so, so like I said, my question is just, are these really do these apply to all areas of accounting, or are these more things that a tax firm should be focused on? And how does it relate to what we do? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it definitely relates to kind of all of accounting and what we do. I think the only thing that really stood out to me as a difference would be the standardizing the data part. Because if you think about what we do with our clients, we have a mixture of clients of different sizes using different technology, using different types of things. And so we really work with their system in order to do the work that we do. And so standardizing may not always make sense, but I think really what I did like about the article is pointing out the fact how important it is to do the insight piece of not just what happened, but the why, and being more predictive about like, what does that mean for the company? And I think that all accounting, taxes, financial advisors, bookkeepers, everyone in accounting can really benefit in that area of really providing, because that's where the value is for a lot of folks, is to understand what is happening in their business and what they can learn from it and how things can go in the future. And so I thought that part really, I think, stood out and does align to what we do. What about you, Ty? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to do some of this is easier to do in the tax function than in other parts of accounting because in all of accounting, I mean, to do any of these things, these are all things that accounting firms and accountants are always looking to try to use these kinds of data and digital strategies to standardize and automate things. But the limiting factors are the non-standard inputs that go into the process and the non-standardization of outputs that come back out. Or should I say on the output side, the non-standardization of the requests of what the outputs would look like, right? And at least in the tax world, you have the advantage of the outputs are highly standardized. And so you've already saw that problem is kind of mostly solved. And so it's really just an input problem on the tax side. Whereas, in the rest of accounting, while you can standardize, if you were to say, well, there's a standard in terms of what financial statements should look like and what line items should be there if somebody's going to follow GAAP and they're going to follow best practices in their industry. But in the small business environment, that's not a foregone conclusion in terms of what people actually want from their accounting process. So I think that's where tax has an advantage on this particular point. But the other thing that I would say is this reminds me of kind of my overall theorem about the future of accounting firms, which is that your top accounting firms or your progressive accounting firms, the ones that are going to become something bigger than just kind of a very small micro business in the future, are either accounting firms that basically turn themselves into software or app companies, technology companies, or accounting firms that turn themselves more into media companies. And in some cases, it may be a combination of both. I think clearly people watching our podcast or this one or our sister show Pop probably know where our strategy lies. And I would say that the tax, I look at this thing and I think, well, if a tax firm were to adopt all 5 of these things, they're getting very close to just being a software solution, which is exactly kind of where I thought this goes in terms of the future of a true tax firm.
I mean, I'd just kind of top this off and say that I'd like to say that, I hope we don't become more of the software. I don't want to go in that direction. I'd like to be somebody that is a tool for the business and that really helps them accomplish their objectives. And I think that if you get too far into this over automation and just trying to have a one size fits all for every client, I think you run the risk of not being as much of an asset to the business because you're trying to give one answer that works for everybody. And so I hope to think that we find that, walk that fine line as well as we can. Do you guys have another article we can talk about?
Yeah. So I found an article regarding one company's view on how to deal with excess of supply. Last week, Boston Beer reported that they elected to throw away excess supply of truly hard seltzer. As we know, the hard seltzer category has increased rapidly over the past few years. To support the growth, Boston Beer was aggressive in adding capacity and inventory. However, recently, when the sales started to slow down, Boston Beer realized that they had overpurchased. Rather than offering promotions or discounts on the excess inventory, they decided to destroy it. And we're talking about 1 million cases of the product. When asked why they elected to destroy the cases rather than providing some discounts to it, Boston Beer's chairman said that it aligned with the company's mission of selling high-quality products and building high-quality brands. It is important to note that other companies have been impacted by the excess inventory of hard seltzers. Constellation Brands took a $66 million obsolescence charge during the most recent quarter. Now, I couldn't find if they destroyed it or if they offered it through some real deep discounts, but so I'm not quite sure how their resolution was. Now, I understand protecting the company's mission, but what disappointed me about this really was the waste. Could there have been another solution rather than pouring product literally down the drain? Donations can be a little bit more challenging when dealing with alcoholic beverages, but one may, find a nonprofit that could have used the beverage in some type of fundraiser or an event. Now, during the times that we're in now, there's not a lot of events that are happening, but, could there have been a different solution? Could they have given it to employees? So I guess my question out to you guys is, is there a better way of dealing with this type of situation that does not impact the company's mission or brand?
Yeah, no, I think that's a tough one. I mean, normally I would look at it and say, well, can we donate it? But I think it's tricky because it's alcohol. I agree with your idea there of selling it for a fundraiser type purpose, particularly if they can find a way to. I suppose the cost of doing this would make it prohibitive, but if they could rebrand it in a way that it is being given out for a donation type purpose and doesn't infringe on kind of the brand image that they're trying to set up for their own product, then that to me would be ideal. But I don't know how. That's probably not realistic given that it's already canned and whatnot, depending on what stage in production they are of the things they're considering donating. But yeah, I think it's just a really interesting problem for them in particular because of the type of product that they have. And so, yeah, I think if there's a creative way to not waste it, then I'd be all for that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I feel you, Tammy. Any wasted alcohol makes me cry. But I think that's, to Charlie's point, I think that's the essence of it, is being a regulated product. It creates more issues. I've seen this kind of thing happen in the more extreme version of a regulated product is in the cannabis world, where if they have excess product, it's not like you can't just go give away cannabis because of how regulated it is and the fact that it is still federally illegal. So if you've got excess cannabis, and in some cases some of the cannabis products in fact will expire, and so that is a thing that can happen or has happened in some phases of that market. So yeah, I don't know. I think, we work with a whiskey company, and in that scenario, we don't have wasted product because we age our product, and it can sit in barrels and it can sit, so it kind of makes me think it's like, well, could they make aged hard seltzer? Could they age it or something? I don't know, because like I said, it makes me cry to lose alcohol. But
yeah, the other thing I think too is that it does impact the brand in a different way, where it's, their focus is the high quality and making sure that they're offering high quality products. But I would say what could negatively impact the brand is being wasteful. Like you have someone like me or like Ty who's crying over spilled seltzer. It is one of those things where that does make you kind of think about their sustainability and their kind of resourcefulness and what they use with their products, because that's just a lot of money and just a lot of waste. But it is a little bit challenging to your point, Ty, whether it be alcohol or cannabis, where it's not as easy to re-gift it or to give it or to repurpose it in a different way, because there's going to be a lot of rules and regulations tied to that as well. But hopefully, this doesn't happen again, and they're a little bit more thoughtful in their aggressive plans for capacity and inventory building. And Ty, you have our next article.
Yeah, so the article that I'm referencing is from the Journal of Accountancy, and it was really a transcript of a podcast where they were talking about hiring. The topic was hiring for culture, and they were interviewing an HR kind of recruiting expert on this. And I thought there was some interesting and good nuggets in this, but there was a particular section that I really honed in on that I thought was of particular interest, because I know kind of that when I'm working with people, I find different people's levels of self-awareness very interesting, and also can have an impact on their work and how they work with other people. But I've never thought about attempting to assess self-awareness. And so I really kind of grabbed onto that when I saw that in this podcast transcript, that one of the questions that was being advised that you might ask a potential candidate was, and let me grab the exact question, because it wasn't about self-awareness, but it led to self-awareness. Or at least the question on the surface wasn't about self-awareness. So the question was, if we hire you and you show up on the first day, what do we get? Who's that person who actually comes to the office here, right? And it also kind of in the transcript of the podcast, there was a very kind of practical discussion of, you're likely to get these kind of standard answers of, well, I have a really good work ethic. So you're going to get somebody who has a good work ethic and who's responsible and who is very committed and loyal and all, you're going to get these standard things. And so what the guest on this podcast suggested is, get past those answers, set those things aside, maybe even tell them up front when you ask this question, who's going to show up to the office when we hire you, say up front, and I know, you're going to have a good work ethic and you're going to be committed and all that, but setting that aside, who are we really getting that shows up to this office, and kind of seeing what the answer would be. And I kind of felt, because he was kind of ragging on the podcast guest was ragging on a candidate that he had a story about where he asked her this, and he told her, you can't tell me that I don't want to hear about your work ethic or your commitment to the organization. What else do you have? And in the moment, she really couldn't think of anything to say. And he really kind of docked her for that. And I thought about that, and I'm like, I don't think I would have anything. If somebody asked me that question and then threw out, several of the possible answers and just said I couldn't use them, I think I might be at a loss for words at that moment too. So I thought that was a little bit harsh, but in his discussing that, what he was getting to, this trying to understand what somebody's self-awareness of who they are, how self-aware they are. And basically what he was saying is, somebody who really has an answer to that and can give you, whether it's positive or negative things, kind of demonstrates their awareness of their own self. And somebody who can't answer that at all suggests that they don't have self-awareness. And I think that could be true, but I guess my point would be, it could also demonstrate that they're just kind of easily flustered or set back by being put on the spot like that. And so you've got to be careful that that's not what's causing the response that you get. But if you can put somebody at ease and actually get them to talk about, or at least get them to try to talk about who they are, or who is actually showing up to your office every day, who that person would be, and if you can get comfortable that person's at ease and then you're not getting a nervous answer, then I think that is a very interesting way to start to get an understanding, how self-aware is this person. And again, I think the reason I honed in on that is because when I'm working with people, the amount of their own self-awareness becomes pretty important in me kind of understanding who they are and how they think. But I've never ever thought of trying to assess their self-awareness in the interviews. So that's why I thought this was so fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And it's kind of like a core problem, and not just in business or in work, but I mean, it's the same. You go out on a date or something and you want to understand who that person is, but you can ask them questions and whatnot, but what you're getting is a guarded, rehearsed answer versus what you believe might be really true. And it could be the case that the things that are said are the same things that you might say had you been super comfortable, right? Maybe it is true that you're a hard worker, whatever it happens to be. And so I think that for that reason, trying to ask the question and then take away generic answers isn't the correct way to kind of resolve that. But I don't then pretend to offer up an answer of, okay, well, then how would you get somebody in an interview scenario to just be comfortable and just go ahead and tell you who they really are? I think that sounds like a very tough problem to solve. I just know when, hearing that other answer, that's not that. You can't just block off their answers and hope that leads them into then becoming genuine. What it would instead lead to is panic, probably, because that person rehearsed their answers, you took them away, now they're left with nothing, like you said. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, Tammy.
Yeah, I kind of went back and forth on this article because I do think that it is good to be able to assess that, people's self-awareness. And you're really, when you're hiring or you're interviewing for a position, you're trying to gauge whether or not you can, what that person's going to be like. And that is a key thing about how you're going to work with them every day. Are they going to fit into the culture? Their resume or their schooling background, gets them an entry to the door. So you're not really always focused, especially in this example where they're talking about first year hires. You're not really looking at their technical abilities. You're really trying to see if they're the right fit. But I would say that a lot of folks practice interview questions because the interview process is really, really difficult. So I could see, I haven't seen that question laid out there in any type of scenario when you're starting to, look for what kind of questions you should ask somebody or what you're going to be asked. I could see someone with the deer in the headlights of like, how do I answer that? You just took away my possible answers and say, I can't say that. So what am I going to say? And I think Charlie mentioned this too. I think that what you're looking at is how they're going to react to when they don't have a scripted answer. Can they come up with something that doesn't necessarily prevent them from even addressing it? Because I think that is what happens if you're already have the case of the nerves because you're trying to impress somebody, and then you have a question that you just don't know how to answer. How are you going to respond to that challenge? Are you going to be able to say something? Are you going to end up just staring right back at them and not say anything? Are you going to get flustered and not be able to form a proper sentence? So I think that can kind of help the person interviewing assess their ability and how they're going to relate to certain things. But it is a tough question. And I don't know if in the example that they gave where they really discounted that person based off that answer, I don't think that was necessarily fair, because it is something that is, hard for an interviewer to assess. But I think some people have, a challenge assessing their own self-awareness. Self-awareness is not easy to assess. So one note, I guess, as people watching this, or if they're reading that article, is to practice that question or answering that question if you're going to go out in the interviewing world.
Just brainstorming here about this point is, if we were to use this, I'm thinking, if we wanted to take away the surprise element of it, the nerves element of it, what if we actually told people before the interview, hey, during the interview, we're going to ask this question. We're going to ask, who is the person that shows up to work? And here's the answer. Here's the kind of standard canned answers that we don't want to hear. So that person has time to think about it, and you're not getting the product of nerves or being surprised. And, because it seems to me that giving somebody time to think about it, even way before the interview, doesn't dilute getting a read of their self-awareness when they actually, if anything, having them put more time into thought about it might give you a better understanding of their self-awareness. I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think giving them time to think about it by telling them ahead of time would spoil the effectiveness of the question?
I don't think it would spoil it. I think it would actually I think someone needs time to answer that. And either they can try to collect themselves during the interview to do that, or if they had time to practice, I think that would actually be a good idea, because then it does give them a little time to reflect and see kind of how they would respond to that. And I also think then it also shows them how important that particular, question is to the company that's interviewing them. Because a lot of times folks are trying to, and we've seen this as we've interviewed folks, where they're trying to give you the answer that they think that you want to hear. And that's why people practice. That's why they look at, certain canned answers, and they think that that's what the interviewer wants to hear. And that's not true. You want to hear more about that person and how that person's going to respond to something. And so I do like the idea of asking questions that they're not 100% ready for, but in a way, but I guess maybe being a little bit more forgiving when they do answer that, because a good way to do that, and I've done this in the past, where if I don't know exactly how to answer that question, I'll pause and let them know I'm pausing and say, okay, here, or, and I answer, and I'd ask, did I answer your question? Or is there anything else that you have, left to ask about that particular, question? And so it gives them a little bit more of a dialogue. So I would say, yes, go ahead and give it in advance. But then I would also say trying to ask questions that they're not prepared for is not necessarily a bad idea. It's just you need to be forgiving when you ask that. What do you think, Charlie?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. The only thing I would really add is just to say that I think that giving them time to prepare would be a good solution for the nerves part of it. What I don't think it would help is if you believe that the canned answers that they want to hear are actually the truth, depending on the question, then it really doesn't solve that. Because if I think about it overnight and then you ask me tomorrow if I believe I'm a hard worker, I'm going to tell you, I think I'm a hard worker every day of the week, and thinking about it overnight really doesn't change that for me. And it comes off as a canned answer, but it's what I believe to be true. And so I think it depends on the question. And I think it's more of just an issue of like, how much are you going to editorialize the responses you're getting from your own candidates? Are you going to put them into a thing where they only get, is it a multiple choice question or is it an open-ended question? Because once we start really giving you two choices to pick, then, we're just changing the nature of the entire discussion, I think. So yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. I think that's a great analysis of it. Well, yeah, let me kick it back to you, Charlie, to see what you got next.
Sure. So I've got an article, another one from accounting today, but a little bit different of a topic. It's called IRS begins using video conferencing to meet with big businesses. And so what's happened is this Monday, the IRS announced that they are extending a practice that they've been using during the pandemic to meet online with individual taxpayers. They've been doing WebEx and Zoom meetings, but now they're going to extend it so that large corporations can do that as well. It's apparently a secure video conferencing program, which is what the article says, but it's the IRS, so who knows how secure everything really is. Last year they began using a secure email technology to help taxpayers, and so they're working on expanding a series of things to try to make working in the pandemic more of an option. To me, it's just kind of interesting because it's an interesting challenge. I mean, big businesses aren't a fan of audits ever. And so anything we do to make that more readily accessible is maybe I can see a lot of pushback to that. And I also thought it was interesting from the standpoint of, is this the IRS's way of kind of trying to connect with the new generation by going video? We're going to go electronic. We're going to start using all the new cool hip things that young people use like Zoom. And so I don't know if that's the play that they're doing there, but I want to get your guys' take on really, is this the way of the future? Are we all going to be video conference audited?
Yeah, I definitely think it is the wave of the future because this is what we've been seeing. And what surprised me about this article is that the IRS is really making a big deal about this fact that they are embracing technology. And it's kind of interesting to me because I feel like our governmental agencies have been they've been slow to do that. If you remember, for those who live in Oregon, the DMV didn't start using or accepting debit cards or credit cards until 2016. They didn't have the right infrastructure, and so it's amazing to me that the IRS is doing this. And it's also because it seems like that is the norm. I mean, businesses have been doing it now. Banks are doing it as well. There's other, companies that are really embracing this wave of technology. So, I'm glad that the IRS is doing it because I think it will be a lot more beneficial and useful. But it is just shocking to me that it's such a big deal when it's been in place now for over 2 years for other companies.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it is indicative of the IRS just moving slower than the rest of the business world. But for the same reasons the rest of the business world jumped into video conferencing is probably part of the inspiration. I think to your question, Charlie, is it make the IRS look young and hip and make it an easier recruiting tool? That could very well be part of the issue too, because we know that the Biden spending plan involves hiring an army of new IRS agents in order to try to raise revenue, and so certainly having the use of more modern technology and the ability to do video conferencing and all that might make it easier for them to recruit talent.
Yeah. So looking at the next article, it was interesting. I was kind of doing a scan of various different articles, and the number of articles I found regarding Facebook's most recent news, its name change to Meta. I had to talk about it because there are so many. So according to Zuckerberg, this name change is to reflect the growing focus on Metaverse. He is quoted to say that the company is all in developing the next computing platform, the successor of the mobile internet. So Facebook has been in the news a lot lately, as we've all kind of seen. And Zuckerberg was clear to say that this rebranding and name change has nothing to do with the most recent negative press that they have received. It's really about the new vision of the company. Quote, the next platform medium will be more immersive and embodied internet where you're in the experience, not just looking at it. And we call this Metaverse. The article does reference other big companies that have changed their names in the past in attempts to distance themselves from bad publicity. I think we've all seen iconic brands do packaging facelifts or make changes to its logo. What this article doesn't really address, and what I wanted to talk with you guys about, is the cost that's incurred when a company changes its name, logo, or brand. There's also kind of the element of confusion that it could have in the marketplace when such events occur. So when I see companies going down this path, I often wonder what the objectives were. And once the dust settles, are the objectives actually achieved? So I kind of wanted to throw it out there to you guys to see what you think about about Facebook changing its name, and as well as the overall, this changing one's name and brand and logo and all those types of things. Is there a cost benefit analysis one can do to see if it actually pans out?
Yeah, I think that I mean, it makes sense to me in terms of the overall argument that what Facebook actually is today doesn't really correlate to the name Facebook the way it did when they first started. And Metaverse seems, more perhaps descriptive of what Facebook actually is for people and in their lives today. So I think it's a good play. I mean, I think to the point that Facebook has had a lot of bad press and lately, and some political issues that have come up. And so the timing of this is suspicious in the sense of it can serve to distance them to some extent from that in people's mind. But I wouldn't be surprised if this was really kind of in the hopper before all that anyway. And so while it may affect the timing of rolling it out, I think this seems like a reasonable and brave. I mean, anytime a company kind of changes their logo, a lot of companies wouldn't do this, even if their name and logo signified something about who they were in ancient history and it has very little to do with today. We see a lot of those companies just carry on their logos and their branding just because it does take a big lift with a lot of courage to kind of make that kind of change. So I think it's a pretty bold move. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's also really interesting, and it's one of those names that you can't really critique too much because it's sort of like, it's supposed to be beyond, right? So anything that you say about it is kind of like, well, what could you really say? But I think that for Facebook, they're so large that from them trying to hide from bad publicity is basically no, it's not going to happen at this point, especially with the type of bad publicity that they got, because it's such a pervasive issue of like not handling people's data or securely, or not handling privacy well. That's something people take to heart. And so changing name isn't going to be enough to get yourself away from that bad publicity. And I also think it takes too long for, I guess they have been in having bad publicity for a while now, but, there seems like there would be a big gap in time versus when some bad news happen till when you're actually ready to name. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but they're still the same old Facebook to me, and it's going to take more than a cool name change to undo all the negative things I've heard. So,
and here's another question, what I just thought about as you guys were talking is, can there be, too many times where a company can change, whether it be changing their logo or their name in the situation? Like, is this kind of like a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity, or is this something that could potentially change again in, the next decade or so?
That's very meta.
Yeah. They're going to need an adjective that's even beyond meta. They're going to become like meta or something. I don't know. I'm sure they'll figure it out.
One should think about it at least to make sure that it's, and I agree with Ty. I think that this is probably something that was long in the hopper, because in changing a name, especially the name, because a logo and a facelift on a packaging or anything like that it's still a heavy lift, but it's not as mega as something in terms of the actual name of a company, right? So I do think that this is something that they thought about and didn't, go into lightly, or didn't take to put a lot of thought into it. But I do, I would encourage them to think about like the fact that you can't do this next year or the year after. It's almost like you can probably have like one or two name changes or logo changes before it gets a little bit more challenging and the impacts are a little bit more severe.
I mean, I think what it comes down to is, what you're really asking is what's the value of a trademark or of a brand name, right? And historically, there's been a lot of value to that because the name recognition but you have to consider that, when you say like the value of a trade name or a brand name over the last 100 years. When you think about what creates that value, it's been the way in which we communicate things and the way in which we get information, the way in which we kind of hold thoughts in our heads as human beings. And when you recite those things, all of those things are changing right now so quickly that I would propose the radical point that the value of a consistent brand name very well could go away. In other words, if new technology and the way our world operates in today's environment and going forward is that brand names can be built a lot quicker than they used to be because of the speed of information. Then it could be that the value of a consistent brand name or a consistent brand name loses its value because you're able to develop new brand names very quickly in this age of information. I don't know that that's true today, and I'm not ready to predict that that's actually the way it's going to be. But I hold open the possibility that it could be that way.
All right, so yeah, that's very interesting, and it'll be fun to see how that all plays out. We'll all be anxiously awaiting the new meta. All right, so I've got another article we can talk about in honor of our 100th episode that is a little bit different. There are 100 ships idled offshore of California, and the communities around that area are reporting increases in toxic pollutants in their water and in the air and basically everywhere. And the article takes a look at, I don't think I said it, this was in NBC News, but the article takes a look at what some people are reporting in those areas and just kind of the challenges of it. It's kind of an interesting thing. Apparently they are idling nearby and basically just having having containers full of the materials are leaching things. And then also there are a bunch of ports where they can normally plug in and not have to anchor in order to idle. And they would then plug into electricity and whatnot. But of course, due to all these supply chain issues, those ports are full and they're not able to use them. And so that's where this problem kind of comes in. And I just thought it was interesting because, when you think about, at least when I thought about supply chain issues, I would think that because there have been trouble getting the materials, that things like the ports being full would be less of an issue because less goods are meeting final delivery. But as I was reading the article, it occurred to me that it's just not that simple because plenty of the things are available, raw materials and whatnot might be available. But if you're short on processors to build whatever you're trying to build, then you get stuck with having one of the items and not the other and nowhere to put it. And so it's just kind of an interesting challenge that I don't know that I really gave full thought to until the article. But I wanted to just kind of open it up to discussion for you all and just see any brainstorming on how could we solve a problem like this? What can we really do to not have these blockades, or should the companies have some kind of fee or tax that they're supposed to pay that's designed to undo this? The article mentioned a $100 per container fee that it was going to charge these businesses, but that seemed to me to be wholly inadequate for what the claims are against them. So yeah, I just want to get you guys' take on what the world should do about this challenge.
Well, it's hard because I think what Charlie said in his segment of like, this is not as simple as, I think one would have thought of. It's just, it's not, it's a supply shortage is a part of it, but then you also have the fact that the ports aren't receiving and there's all these cargo ships that are out there. And then you add on the complexity of the fact of what that's doing to the environment or to people around there, that it's a very complex issue. And so I don't know, how to resolve that necessarily. I do think that assessing a fee or helping, kind of charging for the damage that it's doing does make sense. I don't know who should be the person who's responsible for it because, is it the company they aren't circling the port trying to, for fun? There's a reason why they can't get into the port. So would it be the ports that are having, the issue and having to pay the fines or assessing the fee? I don't know, but there's got to be a solution because, we're having a whole bunch of issues here, and it's not just the kink in the supply chain. It's now evolved into a lot of various different avenues. And so I'm going to kick it right back to you, Ty, to say, what are your solutions?
Well, I'm glad you went first in answering that because you articulated my own confusion and I thought maybe it was just me, but I'm at a loss for whose fault this actually is, that they are circling the harbors, So the idea of charging the companies, I'm not sure it's their fault. And I am confused as to whose fault it is because I know President Biden had made this proclamation that we were going to get the harbor, the dock workers to work, and all that. And then some of the news I was watching, they were interviewing the workers on the dock, and they're like, we're available to work 24/7, but nobody's asking us to. So I think I don't know why this material is not getting unloaded. And I guess where it could be, I will speculate. I'll throw down where I would charge the companies if, based on a potential, what potentially could have been their fault, not knowing if this was their fault. But where I think it could potentially have been their fault is if companies were basically overproducing, because they anticipated shortages. And so it's like the run on toilet paper at Costco, right? If it was like the reverse of that, where companies were basically overproducing some things and and then suddenly shipping them all to the ports. And the issue is that they can't get unloaded because the receiving warehouses don't even have room for them. And the supply chain, the retails, the manufacturers who might use those parts don't have room for them because it's an oversupply. And if it's retail related, the retail stores don't have room on their shelves. If that's what's happening, if what's happening here is that the supply chain's being backed up because we're oversupplying, then that to me would feel like it was the company's fault for oversupplying. They were just getting greedy because they anticipated a huge demand or a shortage that they could try to meet with their oversupply. And so they're now oversupplying, and because of their greed, they've basically blocked up the entire distribution chain. Okay, in that case, charging them, I would say that makes sense. But like I said, I just told a story that's purely speculation. I have no idea if that's what's happening here. And so that's I think that's the mystery on this. Is it's hard to know who to charge or how you would fix it when it's not clear what exactly is causing the problem.
But I think that what does need to be kind of addressed at a higher rate of speed is how to get them in and how to get the products unloaded. Because, when we look at the picture on the article and you see all those ships out in the ocean and the harbor, it's amazing. It's an amazing view to sit there and say that they're all just sitting there waiting and trying to get in. And it reminds me of, when you have you're on an airplane and you're circling trying to land, right? Eventually they have to resolve that issue right away because you only have so much fuel to stay up in the air, right? I just wonder where the sense of urgency is here when you have that many, 100 ships out there waiting to I was going to say land, but waiting to dock and unload and, stop utilizing their fuel and the resources that it takes for them to be sitting out there. Because they're not just sitting there with with your car and you turn it off and you're sitting there. They're idling and they're, definitely causing some issues there. So I guess my push would be there's got to be more of a sense of urgency to get that out. And rather than, we need to obviously figure out if they are going to assess fees and everything, but maybe figure out first how to unload and get them moving and then solve that problem first.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of asked the question that way was because I work with a lot of owners who will look at the problem like this and they'll say, well, can we do just-in-time inventory? Can we sell things we don't have and then replenish, get them and then send them? And then we don't end up having these problems of storing inventory. Now, those kinds of ideas may not apply to the types of materials that we're looking at here or to the business models that are in play here. So those might not be kind of realistic answers, but it's just you're thinking about what are the creative ways that business owners find to try to get past these type of issues. And yeah, it's just, I'm always kind of amazed at, the way that they find basically the way that they can set up these systems to be complex enough to not run into these challenges. And when you see those working, then it just really highlights this issue. So, all right, everybody, that's been the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. This has been our 100th episode. We just want to thank everybody for watching and for listening all this time. And please tune in back in again next week for more business updates from an accountant's perspective. And also check out our sister podcast, Profitless on Purpose, where they discuss anything and everything relating to the nonprofit space. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.